Overthinking feels intelligent. It feels like you're being careful, responsible, strategic, like you're preparing for every outcome. But if we're honest, it's exhausting. You lie awake at night replaying conversations you already had. You rehearse arguments that never happen. You question decisions you already made. And the worst part? You don't feel weak. You feel stuck. Stuck between action and hesitation, between clarity and doubt, between the man you want to be and the man frozen in his own head. This is where most men lose their edge. Not because they lack strength, not because they lack intelligence, but because their mind never shuts off. Overthinking disguises itself as responsibility, but underneath it is fear. Fear of making the wrong choice, fear of losing control, fear of regret. And so the mind keeps spinning, not to solve the problem, but to avoid the risk of action. The Stoics understood this pattern long before modern psychology gave it a name. They didn't see overthinking as intelligence. They saw it as undisciplined perception, a mind that reacts instead of commands, a mind that imagines disasters instead of preparing for reality. Marcus Aurelius, a man who ruled an empire, warned that most suffering doesn't come from events themselves, but from the stories we tell ourselves about them. Epictetus taught that thoughts are not orders, they are impressions, suggestions, and a man who treats every thought as truth becomes a slave to his own mind. That's why Stoics didn't try to silence thinking. They didn't numb it. They didn't distract themselves from it. They trained it. They built mental rules the same way a soldier trains his body, through repetition, clarity, and restraint. Because a calm mind is not passive, it is commanded. Overthinking is not the presence of thought, it is the absence of leadership. And when the mind has no direction, it fills the silence with worry, doubt, and imagined futures. This is why advice like, just stop thinking, never works. The Stoic solution is different. Instead of fighting the mind, they gave it orders. Instead of chasing certainty, they accepted uncertainty and prepared for it. Instead of asking, what if? They asked one powerful question. What is required of me right now? In this video, I'll give you 10 Stoic rules. Not quotes, not theory, but practical mental laws you can apply immediately. Rules that bring the mind back under control. Rules that end mental looping. Rules that restore decisiveness, calm, and self-command, if your mind has been louder than your will lately. This is where those changes. Rule 1. Separate reality from imagination. Most of what exhausts your mind has never happened. It exists only in imagination. Overthinking doesn't come from reality itself. It comes from rehearsing futures that may never arrive. The Stoics noticed this pattern early. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You suffer more in imagination than in reality." That line isn't poetic, it's diagnostic. Look closely at what overthinking actually does. It takes a neutral event, a delayed message, a mistake, a look, a silence, and turns it into a story about failure, a story about loss of respect, a story about everything going wrong at once. Reality is simple, imagination is endless, and the mind, left undisciplined, chooses the most threatening interpretation by default. This is why overthinking feels urgent. Your body reacts as if the imagined future is already real. Heart rate rises, muscles tighten, sleep disappears, but nothing has happened. The Stoics trained themselves to interrupt this cycle at the very beginning. Before the emotion, before the spiral, they asked one grounding question. What is actually happening right now? Not what might happen, not what could happen, not what happened before, right now. When you strip a situation down to reality, you usually find very little there. A message not yet answered, a decision not yet made, an outcome not yet known. That's it. Everything else is added by the mind. This distinction is where control begins, because you cannot control imagined futures, but you can respond to reality. This rule alone can stop a spiral in its tracks. Here's how to apply it in real time. When your mind starts racing, say this internally: "This is what I know for certain." Then list only what is undeniable, not interpretations, not assumptions, not emotional conclusions, just facts. Most of the time, the list is short, and when the list is short, the mind loses fuel. The Stoics weren't naive. They knew bad things could happen, but they refused to suffer them before they arrived. They understood something modern men forget. Worry does not prepare you. It weakens you. Preparation happens in the present. Suffering happens when you live in a future that doesn't exist. Separating reality from imagination doesn't mean optimism. It means precision. It means refusing to let your mind run uncontrolled simulations that drain your strength. A disciplined man does not deny risk. He simply waits for reality before responding. This is Stoic calm, not avoidance. Not numbness, but the refusal to fight ghosts. Pause here when you feel the loop starting. Return to what is real. That is where your power lives. Rule 2. Label the thought as an impression. Most men don't realize this. They don't have thoughts. They obey them. A thought appears, and immediately it's treated as truth, as instruction, as something that must be answered, solved, or acted upon. This is how the mind quietly takes command. The Stoics had a precise word for this. They call it fantasia, an impression, not a fact, not a command, not reality, just a mental appearance. Epictetus warned that the first moment of a thought is the most dangerous, because that is when we confuse appearance with truth. Overthinking begins the instant a thought goes unchallenged. Something is wrong. I said the wrong thing. This could go badly. I'm falling behind. None of these are facts. They are impressions. And yet the body reacts as if a verdict has already been delivered. This is why labeling matters. The moment you name something, you gain distance from it. Instead of being inside the thought, you stand over it. The Stoic practice is simple, but not easy. When a thought triggers anxiety, doubt, or urgency, say internally, "This is an impression, nothing more." You're not arguing with the thought. You're not suppressing it. You're not replacing it with a positive one. You're removing its authority. This single sentence breaks the illusion that every thought deserves obedience. The mind hates this at first, because the mind is used to being followed without question. But a man who labels his thoughts is no longer ruled by them. Here's what happens when you don't label them. A thought appears. It creates emotion. The emotion demands action. Action creates consequence. All without your conscious consent. Labeling inserts a pause. And in that pause, choice returns. The Stoics believed freedom begins here, not in external conditions, but in how we respond to impressions. You cannot stop thoughts from arising, but you can decide which ones deserve attention. This is the difference between awareness and enslavement. A disciplined mind doesn't panic at every signal. It evaluates. Not every thought is useful. Not every concern is urgent. Not every fear is worth energy. By labeling a thought as an impression, you force it to justify itself. Most cannot. They dissolve when exposed. This practice must be repeated, not once, not occasionally, but daily. At first, you'll forget. You'll get pulled into the spiral. That's normal. The goal is not perfection. It's earlier recognition. Over time, the gap between thought and reaction widens. And in that gap, calm is built. Stoic calm is not emotional numbness. It is mental authority. A man who can say, This is just an impression, cannot be easily shaken, because his mind no longer rules him by default. He rules it deliberately. Rule 3. Remove time travel from the mind. Once you recognize that most thoughts are impressions, a deeper truth becomes impossible to ignore. Nearly all overthinking is a form of mental time travel. The mind leaves the present moment and wanders into imagined futures or reconstructed pasts. It replays what already happened. It rehearses what might go wrong. It argues with people who aren't there. It plans for outcomes that don't exist yet. And while the mind travels, the body stays behind, tense, alert, exhausted. The Stoics saw this clearly. They understood that anxiety lives in the future and regret lives in the past. Neither has power in the present. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily that the only time truly ours is the moment in front of us. Everything else is speculation. Overthinking feels productive because the mind is busy. But busy is not the same as effective. A man can think endlessly and still move nowhere. This is why the Stoic response to overthinking was never think harder. It was return to now, again and again. The Stoics trained a single grounding question. What is required of me in this moment? Not what might be required later. Not what could be demanded if things go wrong. Not what others might expect. Now, this question collapses mental excess. Because when you look honestly at the present moment, the list is almost always short. Make the call, send the message, take the next step, or wait deliberately. Overthinking thrives in vague futures. It dies in precise moments. The mind resists this at first, because time travel offers the illusion of control. The future feels safer when imagined, even if those imaginings are negative. But Stoicism teaches a harder truth. You cannot control outcomes. You can only control preparation. Preparation happens now. This is why the Stoics viewed worry as misplaced effort. Worry spends energy without building strength. Action, even small, imperfect action, grounds the mind. When no action is possible, acceptance becomes the action. Not passive resignation, conscious release. This is discipline. Removing time travel does not mean ignoring the future. It means refusing to live in it. A Stoic plans when planning is required, then returns fully to the present. He does not rehearse endlessly. He trusts preparation and himself. This practice must be repeated many times a day. Each time the mind jumps forward, you bring it back, not with force, with command. What is required of me now? Say it quietly, mean it. Over time, the mind learns. It stops dragging you into imagined futures, because it knows you will not follow. This is how calm is built. Not through escape, not through distraction, but through presence. A man anchored in the present cannot be easily shaken, because while others are fighting tomorrow, he is fully here, doing what needs to be done. Rule 4. Write the fear down. Overthinking survives in the fog. As long as fear remains undefined, the mind treats it as unlimited. This is why thoughts loop endlessly. They are vague enough to feel threatening, but unclear enough to resist resolution. The Stoics understood that what remains unexamined gains power. Marcus Aurelius didn't trust his thoughts. He wrote them down, not to vent, not to dramatize, but to see them clearly, because the moment a fear is written, it is forced into shape, and once it has shape, it can be measured. Most overthinking fears collapse at this stage. They sound convincing in the mind, but fragile on paper. Writing removes exaggeration. It strips away emotion and leaves structure. This is why the Stoics valued journaling so highly, not as self-expression, but as mental discipline. When overthinking starts, do this. Take a blank page. Write one sentence, not a paragraph, not a story. One sentence that captures the fear as directly as possible. I am afraid that underscore will happen. No softening, no rationalizing. Precision matters. The mind resists this step because vagueness keeps fear alive. Clarity threatens it. Once the fear is written, read it slowly. Most of the time, something becomes obvious. The fear is either unlikely, survivable, or outside your control. Sometimes all three. This doesn't mean nothing bad can happen. It means the fear no longer owns your attention. Writing creates distance. You are no longer trapped inside the thought. You are observing it. This is a position of strength. The Stoics believed that fear grows when it is hidden. They brought fears into the open, where reason could examine them. Not emotionally, logically. Ask one simple question. What, exactly, am I afraid of losing? Name it. Status, comfort, approval, control. Fear loses force when its object is named. A disciplined man does not avoid fear. He defines it. Because what can be defined can be addressed. And what cannot be addressed must be accepted. Writing the fear down is not about reassurance. It is about truth. Once written, the fear can be passed to the next Stoic rule, control. But without this step, the mind stays trapped in abstraction. Abstraction breeds anxiety. Clarity breeds calm. This is why writing works when thinking fails. The mind is designed to imagine endlessly, but paper is not. Paper demands limits, and limits are exactly what overthinking lacks. This practice should be used whenever the mind starts looping, not occasionally, not when convenient, immediately. A man who writes his fears does not give them room to grow. He faces them directly, calmly, deliberately, without drama. And in doing so, he takes the first real step toward control. Rule 5. Divide control ruthlessly. Once a fear is written clearly, the next step is unavoidable. You must decide what is yours to command and what is not. The Stoics believed this distinction was the foundation of all peace. Epictetus called it the dichotomy of control, simple in theory, demanding in practice. Because the mind does not like limits. It wants control over outcomes, over other people, over the future. Overthinking begins when the mind reaches beyond its jurisdiction, and the Stoics responded with something rare today: ruthlessness, no negotiation, no emotional exceptions, only clarity. Here is the rule. If it is not within your control, it is removed from mental attention, not ignored, not denied, released. This is where most men hesitate. They think that worrying equals caring, that mental effort equals responsibility. The Stoics rejected this completely. They understood that caring without control is wasted energy. After writing the fear down, draw 2 columns. Label the first. In my control, the second. Outside my control, now be precise. Your actions, yes. Your effort, yes. Your preparation, yes. Other people's reactions, no. Timing, no. Outcomes, no. This is not pessimism. It is accuracy. Overthinking survives by blurring this line. Stoicism sharpens it. Once the division is made, something powerful happens. The second column loses authority. You do not argue with it. You do not revisit it. You consciously withdraw attention. Attention is power. What you feed grows. The Stoics believed that peace comes not from controlling life, but from controlling where the mind invests energy. This rule demands discipline, because the mind will try to renegotiate. What if I just think about it a little more? What if this time worrying helps? It won't. That voice is habit, not wisdom. A disciplined man accepts limits without resentment. He understands that control is not about dominance. It is about focus. When attention is removed from the uncontrollable, energy returns to the controllable. This is where confidence is rebuilt, not through certainty, but through self-trust. The Stoics trained themselves to say, "I will do what is mine to do. The rest is not my concern," not because they didn't care, but because they refused to waste strength. This rule does not make life easier. It makes it cleaner. Less mental noise, less unnecessary struggle, more precision. Divide control ruthlessly, and overthinking loses one of its strongest weapons because it can no longer pretend that everything is your responsibility. Only what truly is. Rule 6. Act or release, no third option. Overthinking survives in indecision. As long as the mind believes there is a third option, to think a little more, to revisit the problem later, to mentally rehearse without committing, the loop continues. The Stoics remove that option entirely. Once something has been examined, written clearly, and divided by control, only two paths remain: action or release, nothing else. This rule feels uncomfortable because it demands commitment. The mind prefers ambiguity. Ambiguity feels safe because it postpones responsibility. But Stoics understood that unresolved thoughts become mental debt. They collect interest. Every time the mind returns to the same fear, it weakens discipline. This is why Stoicism is not passive philosophy. It is decisiveness training. If something is within your control, an action is possible. You act immediately, not perfectly, not heroically, just deliberately. Small action breaks mental paralysis. Send the message, make the plan, take the step. The size of the action is irrelevant. What matters is closure. Overthinking ends when a decision is made. But what if action is not possible? What if the situation is outside your control? This is where most men struggle. They release physically, but not mentally. The Stoics demanded something stricter. If action is impossible, you consciously release the matter. Not ignore it, not suppress it. Release it with intent. This means saying clearly, "This is not within my control. I will not return to it." And then honoring that decision. This is harder than action, because release requires trust. Trust in preparation. Trust in resilience. Trust in yourself. The mind will protest. It will say, "What if you need to think about this again? What if you miss something?" This is where discipline matters. A Stoic does not renegotiate resolved matters. Reopening a closed decision teaches the mind that commitment is optional. And a mind that knows commitment is optional will never rest. This rule is not about being rigid. It is about being complete. Incomplete decisions drain energy. Complete ones restore it. This is why Stoics valued resolution over certainty. They understood that certainty is rare, but resolve is always available. When you act, the mind quiets. When you release, the mind rests. Overthinking exists only in the space between. Eliminate that space. Live by this rule consistently, and the mind learns something important. That endless analysis is no longer rewarded. That decisions have weight. That closure is final. This is how self-command is built, not by thinking better, but by deciding fully. Rule 7. Practice negative visualization. Most overthinking is driven by one thing: fear of the unknown. The mind hates uncertainty, so it fills the gap with imagined disaster. But the Stoics did something unexpected. They did not avoid imagining the worst. They faced it deliberately. This practice was called premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of adversity, not to create anxiety, but to remove its power, because fear thrives on avoidance. The things you refuse to look at grow larger in the dark. Negative visualization brings them into the light, calmly, briefly, without drama. The Stoics did not spiral into worst-case fantasies. They asked a single grounding question. If this happened, could I endure it? Most of the time, the answer is yes. This realization alone weakens fear. Overthinking exaggerates consequences. Negative visualization corrects that exaggeration. Here's how to practice it properly. Choose one fear that keeps returning. Not 10, not everything. 1. Now imagine the outcome you're afraid of. Slowly and deliberately. What actually happens? What would you lose? Be specific. Then ask, what remains? Health, character, the ability to act again. The Stoics understood that as long as your character remains intact, nothing essential is lost. This is why they valued inner strength over external conditions. Negative visualization teaches a powerful lesson. You are more resilient than your fear suggests. The mind assumes collapse. Reality usually offers adaptation. This practice also removes shock. When adversity arrives unimagined, it feels overwhelming. When it arrives expected, it feels manageable. The Stoics believed surprise was more damaging than hardship itself. By rehearsing difficulty calmly, they trained steadiness. This does not mean expecting the worst from life. It means refusing to be unprepared. There is a critical boundary here. Negative visualization must be controlled, brief, intentional, purposeful. You imagine the worst, then you stop. You do not dwell. You do not elaborate endlessly. Once the lesson is learned, you return to the present. This is discipline, not rumination. Overthinking weakens because its strongest weapon, catastrophic uncertainty, is removed. The mind no longer needs to loop endlessly. It already knows, I can endure this. This realization builds quiet confidence, not bravado, not optimism, preparedness. A man who has faced loss in his mind is less afraid of it in reality, and fear loses its hold. When it is no longer avoided, the Stoics didn't eliminate hardship. They eliminated panic, and in doing so, they reclaimed their peace. Rule 8. Reduce input, increase command. The modern mind is not weak. It is overfed. More information enters your mind in a single day than a Stoic encountered in a lifetime. News, opinions, messages, notifications, endless commentary. And the mind, flooded with input, mistakes stimulation for understanding. Overthinking thrives in this environment. Because the more information you consume, the more possibilities your mind must account for. The Stoics lived with scarcity of input and abundance of judgment. They understood something modern men forget. Clarity does not come from more information. It comes from stronger command. Marcus Aurelius warned against letting the mind be dragged in every direction. He trained himself to limit what entered his attention, so that reason could remain sovereign. Overthinking is often not a thinking problem. It is an intake problem. Too many voices, too many perspectives, too many hypothetical outcomes. The mind was not built to carry all of this. When input exceeds capacity, judgment weakens. And when judgment weakens, anxiety rises. This is why Stoicism emphasizes restraint, not withdrawal from life, but discipline of attention. Reducing input does not mean ignorance. It means selectivity. Ask yourself, what information actually helps me act better? Most does not. The Stoics believed that unnecessary input dilutes focus. They did not consume endlessly. They reflected deeply. Increase command by narrowing your intake. Less news, less commentary, less opinion, more thought, more action, more silence. Silence is not emptiness. It is space for reason to operate. This is uncomfortable at first, because noise has become a coping mechanism. But when noise fades, the mind regains authority. Overthinking decreases not because you think less, but because thinking becomes clearer. This rule is especially important before decisions. Do not consult endless sources. Do not chase certainty through accumulation. Gather what is necessary, then decide. The Stoics trusted judgment more than information. They believed that a well-trained mind needs fewer inputs to act decisively. Increasing command means reclaiming authority over attention. You choose what enters. You choose what stays. You choose what is ignored. This is not control over the world. It is control over your mind's diet. A man who consumes less, but thinks more clearly, is harder to disturb. Overthinking weakens when the mind is no longer overloaded. When input is reduced, command returns. And with command, calm follows. Rule 9. End the day with review. Overthinking doesn't only happen in the moment. It builds over time. Unresolved emotions, unexamined reactions, small compromises, they accumulate quietly. And then one day, the mind feels heavy for no clear reason. The Stoics didn't let this build up. They ended each day with review, not as self-criticism, not as therapy, as training. Because a man improves only when he can see himself clearly. Seneca described this practice plainly. At night, they would examine the day. Where did I lose control? Where did I respond with discipline? What did I allow into my mind that didn't belong there? This is not about guilt. It is about pattern recognition. Overthinking thrives when you don't know your triggers. But once you see the pattern, it becomes predictable. And what becomes predictable becomes manageable. The day-end review is how you build mental awareness without obsession. It's simple. 5 minutes. A notebook or notes app. No dramatic journaling. Just direct answers. Ask these 3 questions. 1. Where did my mind time travel today? Where did I drift into future fear or past regret? Name the moment. Short and specific. 2. What impression did I accept too quickly? What thought did I treat like truth without testing? Again, keep it clean. 1 sentence. 3. What did I do well? Where did I show self-command? Stoicism is not only correction, it is reinforcement. You must reward discipline. If you only review failure, you train discouragement. If you review progress, you train consistency. This practice does something powerful. It turns your mind into a student instead of a judge. Most men either avoid reflection entirely or drown in it. Stoic review is neither. It is measured, calm, and purposeful. You're not reliving the day. You're extracting the lesson. Overthinking often comes from the feeling that life is out of control. Daily review restores a sense of control because you're actively shaping your character. You stop feeling like a victim of your mood. You become the trainer of your mind. There's another benefit. Review creates closure. Many men carry the day into the night. That's why the mind won't rest. The Stoic review is a signal. The day is complete. The lesson is taken. Now we rest. This is how you reduce mental noise at bedtime. Not by distracting yourself until you collapse, but by resolving the mind. Do this nightly for a week, and you will start noticing something. The same overthinking triggers repeat. The same weak points show up, and slowly the mind learns. We don't spiral here anymore. We correct. We train. We move forward. That is Stoic progress. Quiet, consistent, and real. Rule 10. Accept that control is a practice. There is a mistake many men make when they begin working on their mind. They believe control is something you achieve once and then keep. The Stoics knew better. They understood that self-command is not a destination. It is a practice, something renewed daily, strengthened through repetition, lost when neglected. Overthinking does not disappear forever. It fades when discipline is maintained and returns when it is not. This is not failure. It is reality. Marcus Aurelius, one of the most powerful men in history, still reminded himself each morning to remain calm, just, and disciplined, not because he forgot philosophy, but because the mind naturally drifts. Stoicism does not promise a quiet mind. It promises a trained one, a mind that notices drift quickly, a mind that returns without panic, a mind that does not turn struggle into identity. This is the difference between mastery and perfection. Perfection demands the absence of weakness. Mastery accepts weakness and manages it. A Stoic does not say, "I should never overthink again." He says, "When I overthink, I know what to do." That confidence changes everything, because the fear is no longer the spiral itself, but the belief that you are powerless against it. You are not, but power is not permanent. It is practiced. Each pause before reaction, each thought labeled as an impression, each return to the present moment. These are repetitions, mental reps, and like physical training, the results are not traumatic in a day, but undeniable over time. The Stoics' believed character is revealed not in moments of calm, but in moments of pressure. This is where practice matters, when stress hits, when plans fail, when uncertainty appears. That is not when you invent discipline. That is when you rely on it. This is why Stoicism is not philosophy for comfort. It is philosophy for life. Accepting control as a practice removes frustration. You stop demanding perfection from yourself. You stop judging every mental slip as failure. Instead, you correct and continue. This attitude alone reduces overthinking, because the mind no longer fears mistakes. It learns from them. The Stoic path is not about becoming unshakable. It is about becoming quick to recover, quick to regain calm, quick to reassert command, quick to return to what matters. This is the final lesson. Peace is not passive, it is practiced. And the man who practices it daily does not need to silence his mind. He knows how to lead it. And if there's one thing to remember from this video, it's this: you don't need a quieter world. You need a more disciplined mind. Overthinking doesn't end because life becomes simple. It ends because you become precise. These rules aren't meant to be watched once and forgotten. They're meant to be returned to, especially on the days when the mind feels loud, restless, or unfocused. Save this video, not as motivation, as a tool. And if one of these rules stood out to you, write it in the comments, not for me, but for you. Clarity deepens when you articulate it, and others reading may find the rule they didn't know they needed. If this helped you regain even a small sense of control, share it with someone who's stuck in their head right now. Calm spreads quietly. And if you're serious about building discipline, clarity, and self-command, subscribe to Stoic Compass. This channel isn't about escaping chaos. It's about learning how to stand steady inside it. Return here when the mind starts looping. We'll keep training.